Okay.
All right, great. So here we go. Hey everybody, how's it going? Dan Shinder here on Drum Talk TV. Duh, if you're watching this, you know it's on Drum Talk TV. And I'm coming to you from Globe, Arizona, 100 miles away from Phoenix, where our guest, for the first time, Steve Gadd, is joining us. Tell us where you're watching from, folks. And Steve, how are you?
I'm good, man. Thank you. How about you?
I'm great, thanks. And thank you so much for, in parentheses, finally, coming on the show. I'm just teasing.
You're welcome.
You know, with your first time on the show, and with such a beautiful long career, there's so much to talk about. So we'll go for like 50 minutes or so, and then I'm sure we'll do it again because there's so much to talk about. But before we dig into your career, my first question, Steve, really has to do with drumming. And again, folks, tell us where you're watching from. I'll give some shout outs, see who's watching from where, and let us know if you have questions for Steve. And I'll answer the questions for Steve, and if you have questions for me, he'll answer those. Or something like that. So, Steve, my first question is this. You know, everyone knows your credo is that if you don't have groove, it really doesn't mean shit. You know, it really comes down to groove. And I don't know where I stand on this question, and I'd love for the fans to chime in too, but I've always wanted to ask you this. There's some people like Benny Greb who professes to teach groove. There's people like Carmine Appice that says either have it or you don't. How do you feel about that? Can someone learn groove, and other than playing somebody something on a record or a CD or whatever, how do you define groove, and can it be learned?
You know, first of all, I mean, not all music has. There's certain kinds of music that it's not about groove. It's about other things. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you know, like when I think about groove, it's about an agreement. So it's not. It doesn't come from me, but it comes from me with other people. You know, finding an agreement about the right way to make the music, you know, feel the way it's supposed to feel.
Right.
So, you know, so it comes from, it's not from any one person. It's, that's what you try to, every time I play some music, I'm looking to try and come up with an agreement with the other guys that I'm playing with, and then go from there. So, you know, and once you have everybody, you know, on the same page listening, then, you know, you got a shot at it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Very interesting.
But it isn't like any one person is in control of it. It's about trying to get everyone on the same page.
That makes sense, because if the drums are grooving, quote unquote, but the bass isn't locking in and grooving with the drums, there's no groove, right?
Right. So the groove is the agreement of amongst the musicians that are playing at the time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I love that. And of course, there's so many examples that you've brought to the table. And folks, if you look at the graphic player that you're viewing us on, you can see the many credits to Steve's career. And Steve, I'm just going to read off a few. Of course, there's the Steve Gadd Band, and I'd love to hear how you joined that. Of course, the Manhattan Jazz Quintet, you were in and out of a couple times. You worked with Steely Dan, Chet Baker, one of my wife's favorites, Michael Franks. Barefoot on the Beach is just such a great album. Al Jarreau, Paul McCartney, Michael McDonald, Michael Petrucciani, I mean, David Sambor. It just goes on and on. What can you pick out one of the most challenging, I won't say people, but what was maybe one of the most challenging projects for you, be it one song on an album or a particular album you were part of, and what was the challenge?
You know, I don't, the challenge is always the same. You know, to try and get to you know, try and get to the place where we're supporting the music, and accomplishing what the artist and the producer wants. So that's always the challenge, and it's different for every session. So it could, and it's the challenges are trying to get a good balance in the headphones, knowing what you need to hear. That's one thing. I mean, if you're playing with a click, I need to hear the click louder than I hear myself.
Mm-hmm.
So there's little things that you learn along the way to meet all these little challenges that happen every time you start a new session and play with new people. Right. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So so the challenges are the same on every session. So maybe they're more extreme on others, but I don't look at the extremes. I just look at what I got to do and try to do it the best I can. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And you bring up an interesting point, Steve, because there's a lot of, not just drummers, but there's a lot of other musicians who haven't delved into the session scene. They're in a band, they've been in a band for 2, 3, 5, 10 years, and it's kind of like a family. And let's face it, over 3 years, you learn someone's playing more than you would just doing a session. So those who have not done sessions, imagine playing with someone for the first time, and it's to record a record. It's to do the real thing. It's not rehearsing for a tour. It's not writing an album, rehearsing an album for months, and then going in and laying it all down. It's really a whole different thing. So I could see how each time that brings its own challenges indeed. Yeah.
Right.
And maybe even if you do session work, if you did something with, let's just say, Lee Sklar 3 years ago, and now you're going to work with him again, but if it's on a completely different project, in a way, you guys are totally starting from scratch, right?
Right, but the fact is, like when you play with people, you get to understand their musicianship.
Right.
So, which means it's not about a style, it's just about the way they adapt to and approach what's at hand.
Mm-hmm.
And Lee's one of those kind of guys that has had a lot of experience, and so I go in automatically with confidence just because I've worked with him before, and we've locked it in, and now we have to try and do it on another piece of music, maybe in another style. And, so we back to the drawing board, but if we're both into doing, trying to do the same thing, then it's a pleasure.
Yeah.
The process is fun.
Yeah, and music should be fun. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think that's why we all start. I don't think anyone, no matter how old, there's some people in their 60s that are becoming musicians because it's something they always wanted to do, but they had the corporate gig, they raised a family, and now they're becoming musicians, versus someone like you and I who started when we were really young. I don't think anyone starts saying, I'm going to do this because I know it's going to be a pain in the butt and it's going to be hard work. They do it for the fun part of it. It could end up being a pain in the butt and hard work, but we do it for the fun of it is what inspires it. And I feel we should always keep it that way, keep that spirit of it,
Yeah, I agree.
Let's look at some questions and see where people are chiming in from. I just got to bring it up here on the monitor. There we go. And folks, thanks for joining Steve and I. We really appreciate it. Can't believe it's September. That's just crazy. People chiming in from Orange County, California, Florida, Nepal, Virginia. Awesome. I just saw a question. Where did it go? Here we go. This is from Tarba Fib asks, how has the studio and live environments changed over the course of your spectacular career? This is a great question because it has to do with not just technology, but sometimes protocol and how people do things. So what's your answer to that for both live and the studio?
Well, in the studio, I mean, the digital thing makes it going from tape to digital, can make, you can do things, I mean, like, you can go in and overdub, to a track. Years ago, when you were going to tape, everything was live.
Yeah.
And they were, if there was a problem, you had to redo the take. Right. There was not as many fixes back then, like now, they can combine tracks after, they got a lot more technology in terms of editing and being able to overdub. So it's made it a lot quicker in some ways.
Right.
We end up doing a lot of more overdubs to tracks that are already done. It's just a different technology.
Yeah.
In some ways it's good because it's quicker and you have a lot more, the editing is quicker but I miss the camaraderie in the studio.
Yeah.
And the hang with the guys.
Right.
But that's just the way, like the technology and the state-of-the-art equipment, somehow put the studios out of work because everyone could put a good system in their house,
Yeah.
and they could do it with Pro Tools, and they could, have guys come in and overdub or send a file, and they could if the guy's got a studio, so that's mainly the difference, I think.
Yeah, and before we get to the answer to the live part of that question, I want to add to that question, back when things were transitioning from, we had 2-inch tape on a machine the size of a wash machine, an Atari or whatever, when you went from tape to digital to recording to hard disk, was there like a learning curve, or rather a transitional acceptance where it was like, hey man, the warmth isn't there, the punch isn't there? Like, did you have to get used to that new sound? Now you can kind of make up for it, but back then when it first changed, there was clearly a difference between analog and tape versus digital, right?
That didn't bother me that much. Do you know what I mean? Because I was, doing live things, and then I would do some recording, and I really didn't have the time to really stop, and I just tried to do the best I could. And in the studio, when you're using phones, it's like, even back in the old days, I mean, to try and get a mix in the phones where you can hear everything, it's impossible.
Yeah, and the click, yeah.
So what I've learned over the years is you've got to give up trying to get that perfect thing happening, and you learn what you need to hear. So it's not like a great drum sound in the phones that I'm listening to. I trust that, I tuned them and they sound good, and the engineer likes what we got. Now it's about not trying, now I got to hear the click. I want to lock in with the bass player, so I've got to hear those guys louder than me. You know what I mean? So, it wasn't always about that great sound, because you don't really get a great sound in the phones when you're recording. You learn to get what you need, and you make do. So I just continued to do that when the technology changed, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Did you notice much of a difference between the finished products?
I was concentrating on, what I always concentrated on.
Yeah.
Was it wasn't what my sound was. It's like, I got a sound and then I let it go, and now I got to try and lock in with everybody else.
Yeah. How about after it was done and mixed, though? Did you notice a big difference?
No, but so when I would go into the control room and listen to a playback, then I would say to the engineer, maybe bring the hi-hat up a little, or, the snare drum's a little bright, or let's do something with the sound of the bass drum.
Right.
For the playback, so I'd let the engineer and the producer know what I thought things should sound, right? Not necessarily where I had to have it in the phone, but when I can work, and I know what I have to do, even if the sound isn't right, to get to the music. But when you hear it back, you make some suggestions, in terms of levels and things like that.
That makes sense. Yeah.
So, and I just continued to do the same thing, whether it was analog or digital. It's the same thing. I still have to do the same thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
that makes sense. How about over the course of 40, 50 years, what has changed in a live situation? And do you use, I don't think you use inner monitors, correct? You use the live wedges and speakers?
I like wedges. Yeah. I like wedges, yeah. There's all kinds of different live gigs. I mean, a lot of clubs have sound systems now.
Yeah.
So, back in the 70s, we played in clubs, and it wasn't, the sound thing wasn't as elaborate, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Now, you go in and you take your own sound guys and sometimes clubs have sound systems, sometimes you bring a system in. So there's, most of the time now there's PA and monitors involved, even in clubs. Years ago, it wasn't as much that way. But I think the change is more in the recording, in the technology, rather than in the live playing.
Cool, thanks. And thanks again for that question. I'll peek some more and look at some more questions in just a moment. Steve, I remember, so I grew up listening to, in my parents' home, stuff like Simon and Garfunkel and the Fifth Dimension, and a lot of the stuff that Hal Blaine played on and stuff you played on, and I remember driving with my dad, getting in the car in the 80s, and he turned on the radio, and 50 Ways to Leave Your Lover was just starting, and he said, "Oh, Danny, you've got to learn that drum part." And I listened, it was like, oh, okay. My question is, did you have any idea when you came up with that, how quote-unquote iconic that part would become?
No. I had no idea. I was...
was it more of a spontaneous epiphany?
Well, it was, I was doing a lot of recording back then and going from one session to another, and always trying to come up with something that worked. And, this was a session with Paul Simon, and Phil Ramone was the producer.
Right.
And on this particular song, the chorus fell into place pretty easily, but the verse needed something, and we just kept on trying different things. And in those days, I was in a drum booth. It wasn't always easy to get out of that and get into the control room. So, and while we were really, trying to work out the arrangement, they'd record things, but Paul would go into the control room and listen, just to see where it was, and him and Phil would make suggestions, and I would practice between takes, just little things that I was working on, you know what I mean? And one of the things that I was practicing was just like playing the hi-hat with the foot and the left hand right after it, and coming up with syncopated things like that. And Phil heard me practicing that stuff, and it was sort of like a little military groove, and he said, "Why don't we try something like that?" And that's how that thing came about.
Yeah, that's great.
So it isn't, I came up with it, but it was a group effort, between, Paul and Phil, and making suggestions, and always trying to get it to the best level it could be.
Yeah, that's great. It's a beautiful drum part. It's great. It really is. And when you mentioned Phil Ramone, it makes me look at your list of all these artists you've recorded with and toured with, and think of the countless producers you've worked with. What advice do you have for musicians who might be heading toward or be more newish to working with a producer and be able to wrap their heads around the discipline they need to take direction from someone else telling you how to do something?
Yeah, well, that's a tricky one, because then your ego gets involved.
Mm-hmm.
And, if, you have to really know that everyone is doing what they're doing to make the music the best that it can be. It's not a personal thing, and a suggestion on how to do it isn't saying that you're doing it wrong. It's just trying another way. And so you learn to fight those feelings of insecurity.
I was going to say demons.
Well, yeah, but they're feelings like you're not doing it, you're not good enough.
Right.
You're inferior. You're doing something wrong. They're not. The suggestions shouldn't bring out negative thoughts. They're just another idea to try and see if it works. You try it, and sometimes you say, "Yeah, that's a good." And what I've learned is sometimes you take those suggestions reluctantly and try them, and they work out in a positive way. So experiencing a couple of those things happening time and time and again helped me realize that it wasn't a put down, it was a suggestion.
Right.
And that's a big one. You have to constantly, because your mind plays tricks on you,
Yeah.
And you start feeling like you're trying things and you're doing the best you can, and it's not working out. And it isn't a personal thing. It's part of the process, and you learn to deal with it.
Right. And I think it also plays to, I've always believed that in music, there's no such thing as mistakes. There's only new discoveries. And it's such a subjective thing that, like you say, as the player, maybe someone does have a better idea, and it's not even often a matter of being a better idea, but it's what's going to suit their vision more. And if it's their vision,
right,
you got to play to that.
Right. But the proof is in how the thing feels in the long run.
Right.
And that's what, how it all locks together, without trying to force, without trying to play the music, but allow the music to play us.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So, and that's just, that's something that's the thing that we always strive for.
Yeah. Thanks.
The musicians change, the music changes, but we're always striving for that the camaraderie, the agreement, and the togetherness.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. That's great. A couple other questions. Shai Edelson says, "Love you, great honor." Pretty sure they're talking to you. Last February at the Hammersmith Apollo in London, I was going to bring this up for the Ginger Baker tribute. How many rehearsals did you do with Clapton, and were all four drummers at the rehearsals?
There was about 4 or 5 days of rehearsal. Not all, not all the drummers were there all the time. A couple of times it was just me and Sonny Emery there.
Mm-hmm.
And then gradually, as the musicians and Sonny and I started to learn the music better. Then they would bring in the guest drummers that were going to play, and then we'd rehearse with them. So it was a process, and I thought it was well organized. And Eric's really good at doing this thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm friends with both Kofi and Nettie Baker, and I had them on together shortly after you folks did that show, and they sent me a couple clips that we played. It looked like it was, I wish I could have been there, because Ginger was also an influence on me. That must have been a fun gig.
It was great. It was great to meet all these other drummers that I hadn't met.
Yeah.
Kofi, I met him. He sounded great.
Yeah, he's a great player. He really is.
Yeah, and I was very honored to be asked to be a part of that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Let's see who else we have here with questions. Here's a comment that I'll read. This is from Carlos Guzman. Dr. Gadd, one of my favorite live performances that is available on YouTube is a show in Japan from 2006. You were a guest on a song from that artist called Take You to the Sky High. Was that part of a series of shows with that group, or was it a one-off? He says it was a spectacular performance and recording. Do you remember that, Steve?
I'm not sure what was that one called? What was it?
Take You to the Sky High.
Well, do you know? Does he know who the artist was?
It doesn't say the artist's name. Carlos, let us know the artist's name. It was in Japan in 2006. Let's see if he commented. Oh, he says. Oh no, that's somebody else. Sorry. Casey is saying hi from Mumbai, India. So we'll see if Carlos chimes in with that. I try not to ask. Oh, well, here's a question. I got to ask this from Ashish, all the way in Nepal. It's funny, Ashish is on like every broadcast I do, no matter what time it is. I don't think Ashish sleeps because he's way in Nepal, which is like a 12-hour time difference. So he says, can you tell us about your experience of the Modern Drummer Hall of Fame in 1984? How did you make it, and what was your practice methods back then?
Well, I was working a lot, I don't really know how I made it. You know what? All of the awards or the honors that I've received, they were all came as a surprise to me. I wasn't going after anything other than trying to work the best that I could and trying to give the people that hired me, try to accommodate them what they wanted for their art form, what they wanted for their music. And so all of the honors and rewards came as a result of me doing that, not as a result of me trying to get the awards. Those were all frosting.
Yeah.
My practice back then was, I was working a lot in the studio, so it wasn't like I went home and practiced, but spending that much time, in a drum booth or in the studio, I would practice between takes, or sometimes if I had time between sessions, if there was a room that they weren't using and they had a set of drums in it, I would go practice, between sessions, So I played a lot, and I when I wasn't recording, I would practice between takes.
Yeah.
And after that, that's what I did in those years. That's how I practiced.
Yeah, cool. Thanks. Let's talk about influences a little bit. And if I'm not mistaken, you started playing drums probably in 1956 when you were about 11. Who were your influences back then? Well, first, and maybe this ties into that answer, But what was it you saw or heard that made you want to play drums as opposed to the accordion or the kazoo or the tuba?
Right. Well, I was living with my mom and dad, and my brother and I. My brother's 2 years younger than I am. He was a baby. I was living. We were living with my grandparents and my dad's brother. My dad's parents and my dad's brother. Until I was about 3 years old.
Okay.
And my dad's brother was a drummer in high school when, growing up, had been in the military and was out, and now was a veteran, and he was marching in a Memorial Day parade.
Oh.
And he was playing a red parade drum. That's the first drum I ever saw. I was about 3. I went downstairs and the drum was on a chair. He was getting ready to go to the parade. And I've been playing drums ever since. Now, what they tell me when I was a kid, 3, 4 years old, I used to bang on everything. So my uncle showed me how to hold a pair of sticks, and he had a pair of sticks, and we had a couple of little pieces of wood that we played on. And we'd play together with listening to John Philip Sousa marches. And so that's how I began. And I played every day. I listened to records and played. And then when my uncle came home, or when everyone came back from work, we'd sit around. This was before television, and we'd sit around listening to the John Philip Sousa marches, and my uncle and me would play. And all the family would be there, so it was a lot of fun. It was a good hang.
That's good.
And they were very involved in how my love of playing music. They never pushed it, but they encouraged it and supported it. And when I was about 7 or 8, I started taking lessons. And, I continued doing that, and eventually went to music college and played in the Army band, and then went to New York.
Yeah.
Here I am, you know what I mean? So.
Yeah. And who were some of your early influences on the drum set?
Well, my uncle played, Gene Krupa for me, and Art Blakey, Max Roach, Louis Bellson, Buddy Rich, and
oh, you might be covering up the microphone. Are you there? I think you're covering the microphone up a little bit. No, it went mute for some reason. Hold on 1 second. Let me try to mute and unmute. There we go. There we go. Now we're back. Oh, and you can't hear me? Oh, no. Okay, 1 sec. Hold on, folks. We'll fix this. Oh, he's going to jump back in. All right, Steve should be back any moment. Hang in there, folks. Something funky went on with the connection. All of a sudden, I couldn't hear him. I thought maybe he was covering the microphone because he's using his phone. So there might have been a connection issue. Hope you folks are enjoying this. Hope you're having fun. It's fun to hear Steve's early days of actually getting not just started, but inspired to start, right? And to have such vivid memories at 3. Not everybody has those. I do. I have a sister that's 3 years younger than me, and I actually remember my mom being pregnant with her, so I had to be like 2.5 or whatever. So that's pretty neat to hear that story, the big red marching drum on a chair. He started banging on it, banging on everything else, and basically he's been playing drums ever since, which is really cool. Let's see. I'm going to look at some other questions. Hang in there, folks. I'll be right back with us. Hey, Jules. How are you? Jules Radino from Bloister Cult. And And let me go to the waiting room. Let Steve in. There we go. Steve's iPhone, I think, will work better. There we go. All right. And we're back. Just waiting for the audio to connect on Steve's side. There we go. We're back.
What happened? I don't know what happened.
I don't know. It might have been a raccoon out on the cable line outside my office or something. But we heard you saying the early influences like Max Roach, Art Blakey, Louis Bellson, Buddy Rich, and then that's when it cut out.
Okay, so then and then I just sort of continued to listening to. I got into Miles and all his, with Jimmy Cobb and Philly Joe Jones and different rhythm sections, Wynton Kelly and Paul Chambers, and then and then I started listening to Train and Elvin, and Tony with Miles, and so and basically, I tried to emulate those guys. I try to emulate anybody that I've heard that I like what they do. I try to copy them. What I mean? Because what they're playing that catches my eye at the time it sounds so beautiful and right for what and feels so good. It makes me want to learn how to do it.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. That's the, I think, epitome of inspiration. What more contemporary drummers on the scene do you follow or admire?
Well, I don't get a chance to really go out and listen to a lot of different guys like I used to.
Yeah.
But there's guys like Mark Julian. You know Mark?
Yeah.
Great musician. Chris Dave.
Yeah.
There, Aaron Spears.
Yeah.
Gerald Hayward.
Yeah.
So there's some young guys, but I watch guys that I don't know what their names are on some of these Zilch things, and there's some young guys that are just incredible.
Yeah.
Doing their own things. I don't know their names, but there's so many young guys that they're doing spectacular things. It's great to see that.
Yeah, that's neat. It is fun to also see just how, in some ways, how drumming has actually, I guess, evolved would be the word, And is there any music that you listen to that might surprise people because they know you as this, that, and the other thing, but then there's this over here, this other music appreciation you have for, like, are you into death metal or polka salsa or anything that someone wouldn't say, oh, I wonder if he listens to that?
I'm not. Let me tell you something. I appreciate the drummers that play the metal stuff. The energy and the technique and everything that goes into that stuff. I'm in awe of those guys. I don't necessarily listen to that all the time, but I am, flabbergasted by the way some of those guys can play that stuff.
I feel the same way. Yeah, it's not my thing, but I'm amazed by it.
And if I was, I'm not in an age where that music, where I would jump into that stuff. But if I was young and I was going to do that, I would emulate these guys because they wrote the book on me. You know what I mean? And it's not something that anybody can do.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I appreciate it, but it's not like I'm drawn to that kind of music like I'm drawn. I like to listen to classical music.
Oh, nice.
I like to listen to old kind of, Ray Charles. Louis Armstrong, Nat King Cole.
Oh, yeah.
Frank Sinatra. I love all that. The old things that I used to love, I still love that stuff.
Yeah.
And, I love new things. I'm not sort of researching new things, but my wife is constantly, playing new music when we drive in the car. And I get a chance to hear it that way.
Yeah.
If I'm not working, up until this pandemic, if I wasn't working, if I had time, I'd be studying or trying to learn the next thing that was coming up, because nowadays people send you things in advance.
Yeah.
Years ago, you just go into the studio and rehearse in the studio and record it. Now they send it to you in advance so you can check it out. So if I'm working and I have time off, a lot of times I'll be studying the next thing down the line. So that takes time away from things that I could just listen to for enjoyment.
Yeah.
But I let my wife, she puts things on and the latest things, and she's got good ears and good time.
Yeah.
So we listen together, and I'm updated that way.
That's great. Thanks. Let's take a couple more questions for the audience, and then I'll have one special closing question. I don't want to keep you too long. Like I said, we'll always be able to do this again. Let's see. How about okay, Kelly Small. Hi, Kelly. Thanks for joining us. Kelly asks, this is a different type of question, but I think could be helpful to younger listeners. Kelly says, it is about all the drug use in the business back in the day. Can Steve comment from his current perspective if the drug use creates difficulties in the business and working with others? Hoping there might be some nuggets for younger folks to hear personal and business impact.
Well, I mean, back in the 70s and early 80s, there was a lot of drug use in the business. It was a big party, and it was at the end of that, in the mid 80s, where people started to realize that it was, you were playing with fire, that these things, it started out as fun, but it turned out to be a nightmare.
Yeah.
And so nowadays, I don't see it in the business, and I'm not confronted with it, and I think it makes communicating and working, puts it on a better level. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there was that period you mentioned in the later 80s began, I believe, the transition of where it actually became fashionable to live a healthier lifestyle, and that's when things sort of turned around. We had lost by then so many immense artists, from Janis Joplin to Jimi Hendrix, Morrison, Bonham, Moon. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And maybe some of that was part of the eye opener.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. But I mean, it's like life is funny. It goes in phases. I mean, it was a big party, and then all of a sudden, people gradually started to realize, like, your body isn't made out of metal.
Right.
If you really don't take care of it, you're going to have problems. So thank God that I had friends that were supportive and stayed by me and saw me saw me into rehab.
Yeah.
And then were there when I got out, and I was able to continue playing and not use.
Yeah.
Which was good.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that question, Kelly. That was definitely different. Couple more real quick. I just saw one. I scrolled past it. Give me a second here. I'll throw one out. And folks, if you asked a question, here's another one. If you asked a question and I didn't get to it, what you want to do is mail a check for $5 to, no, I'm kidding. I'll send this link to the interview to Steve's wife Carol, and maybe Steve, you can plow through over the next week or so and comment on a couple, or we'll have some fodder for our next interview. But here's one from Paul Bologna. It says, Samba song changed my outlook on drumming back in the 80s. Did you write the chart, then play it, or was it off the cuff in the studio?
Is that the one with Chick Corea?
Yeah.
I didn't write a part. I used with Chick. Excuse me. I read off the piano score. So.
Oh.
So I just we rehearsed it. I read off the piano score and tried some different things. It just sort of fell into place. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Organic.
And a lot of time, I mean, the fact I was practicing between takes all the time, different things, and sometimes something that I was practicing a week before, you know, could be something that I could try and develop for a project today or then, you know.
Yeah.
So the more I practiced different things, the more I had different things to try on different sessions. Not necessarily that I was practicing for the session that I was on. I was just practicing.
Yeah, just coming up with stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah,
right.
Organic creation. Yeah, absolutely. So I have two last quick questions. The first one is, back in the 70s and 80s, when you were doing everything you were doing, how far did you look ahead at all regarding your career, and did you ever imagine you'd be 75 in the year 2020 and still be doing what you're doing, loving what you're doing, and being in demand for what you're doing, playing the drums?
You know, I never really looked ahead like that. I was content just doing what came in front of me.
Yeah.
What was the question again?
As far as, you know, other than looking ahead, did you imagine that in 2020 at 75 years old you'd still be doing this and loving it and being in demand too?
No, well, I never imagined, but I never imagine. I don't ever think about not playing. I think I'll play until I die. You know what I mean? The fact that back before, I never thought about that kind of stuff, but now, I mean, when I think about it now, yeah, it's pretty cool. I mean,
yeah.
I mean, here I am, and I'm still doing it, and I still love it. So.
Yeah, I firmly believe that drumming's going to work out for you, Steve.
You know what I've been doing in the pandemic? I've had time, and so I started practicing. I've got these Vic Firth sticks with rubber tips that I can play on a piece of wood or on the table in the house. So I've been playing traditional a lot, practicing rudiments and writing a book on different warm-ups that I do. So
nice.
It's been fun, and so it's been keeping me busy and keeping me playing.
Yeah.
And
that's great.
And I'm looking forward to sharing.
Good. I can't wait. My last question for this interview is this, Steve. When you're not playing music, when you're not doing anything related to music, what do you like to do? Do you have other interests? I know you've been married forever. You and Carol spent a lot of time together, which is beautiful, inspiration on its own. But is there something outside of music you have an affinity for that you like to do? We have animals. I have 4 dogs. I love hanging with them. Yeah.
We had 5. We had to put one down a few months ago, but I love spending time with Carol. I have 4 kids, 2 boys and 2 girls, and one of my daughters and one of my sons live in California, and one of my daughters has 3 kids. So I try to see my kids and my grandkids. My other son is in Vegas. I try to see him. They come and see me. I think exercise is important. I try to do a little exercise every day.
Yeah.
But I like, I'm away a lot, so it's really nice, spending time with Carol, and then when the both of us can be with the kids, that's great, or visit friends in LA, I like to do that.
Yeah.
We just went on a little road trip because we haven't really, you can't do much in this pandemic.
Right.
So we went to some of the national forests where you can drive through them.
Yeah.
And stayed in places that were safe, that they were disinfecting, and they didn't have a lot of people, and I saw some beautiful national parks. I think we're going to try and do more of that.
Good.
Especially during the pandemic, when I don't think I feel comfortable flying now.
Oh, me neither. Yeah. Oh.
And I don't want to do anything before I feel safe. I'm 75, and I've had lung issues before, so I don't want to have any problems.
Yeah. No, playing it safe is the best way to go. My wife and I love the outdoors as well. I was telling you earlier before we started, we just got back from our first trip outside our little town here in 6 months, and just that drive to Vegas to see a bunch of our kids and grandkids, all that nothingness was so beautiful. To see the desert and the mountains, yeah, it was great. Really, really nice.
Did you drive over the dam when you got to Vegas, or did you go around it?
Oh, we went on that new bridge they built a few years ago. Yeah, just because it's so much quicker.
Yeah, but it's beautiful there, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
What they've done is pretty amazing.
Oh, that whole renovation and what they've done with the freeway, even right after that, it just opens it up so much more. There's no traffic, well, especially now, but still, it's a much easier ride when you get to town there.
Right, so we drove through Zion.
Uh-huh.
We went to Bryce, went to Canyons National Park.
Wow, and we saw a lot.
Went to the Arches.
Yeah.
The Capitol Reef.
Wow.
So we hit. I went with my wife and my friend Walt Fowler and his wife Michelle. And Walt grew up in Utah, so there's so many national parks in Utah.
Yeah.
With different kind of. Views and things, and it was spectacular.
Yeah, so much to see. I think people need to get out and do that more, Yeah,
it was fun. It was good. It was good to get away.
Yeah, I saw a bunch of the pictures that Carol posted. They were beautiful. Well, Steve, thank you so much. Hang on the line for just a moment after we disconnect from the live. I want to thank everybody so much for joining. If I didn't get to your question, we'll get to it next time. We'll do this again sometime. But folks, thanks so much for following Drum Talk TV and for joining Steve Gadd and myself here for his first interview ever. Thank you, Steve. Hang on. And thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.
Okay, thank you.